This year has been dedicated Le'ilei Nishmas Sheftel Yekusiel Ben Chaim Hillel. Upon his yahrzeit this week, the Schos of Limud Torah of the Shir should provide a great aliyah to the neshama. In this video, we want to discuss something the Gemara mentioned on Monday's Daf Samach Beis and Beis, where the Gemara made a distinction between two different swamp kind of birds. Talked about the Tarnagola de Agma, the swamp rooster, and the Tarnagol Ta de Agma, the swamp hen. And Papa said that the swamp rooster is not kosher, it's from the non-kosher birds, whereas the swamp hen is kosher. So this, this is an interesting kind of Gemara. It makes us pause for a second and think about it. What does that mean that the male one is not kosher and the female one is kosher? How does that make sense? So Tosfos deals with this. Tosfos tells us that the Gemara doesn't mean that these two birds are of the same species. It actually, these names are referring to different species, and the Gemara really means that the species that's called the rooster, the swamp rooster, that is from a species which is completely not kosher, and the description of the swamp hen describes a species that is kosher. That's what the Gemara really means. Okay, so if, we have Tosfos here after that explanation, and the Gemara is fairly straightforward. However, there is a Tosfos in Masechtas Nida on Nunamid Beis, where Tosfos suggests a very different approach. Tosfos there suggests that we keep like the simple reading of the Gemara, that the Gemara means that we're talking about birds of the same species, and yet the male one is prohibited, the female one is kosher, is permitted. So of course this requires explanation. Specifically, Tosfos makes the point that, if it's the same species, by definition, this swamp rooster came from a swamp hen, was born from a swamp hen. So whatever comes from something tar is itself tar. If it comes from a kosher thing, it should be kosher. That should be the rule. That's obviously that's normally how it works. So how does this make any sense? How could it be the male one is not kosher? What does that mean? So Tosfos answers by explaining that since the bird hatches from an egg, so it doesn't grow in the mother. He says it gets nutrients. It grows from the ground, whatever exactly that means. The idea is that the egg grows by itself. That's how we view it, and therefore it does not, adopt the status automatically of the parent animal. And therefore, since the observation is we see whatever exactly this bird is, we don't know exactly what it's referring to, but Tosfos says if you take a look at the swamp rooster, it doesn't have the kosher signs, different simanim that the Mishnah went through. Should discuss different signs that a kosher bird would have. There's three positive ones, and that it cannot have the behavior of clawing or eating its food with its claws in a certain way. So Tosfos explains that, curious as it is, but what we see is that what's observed is that the male one doesn't have the kosher signs, so it's not kosher. So Rabbi Chanan Wasserman, in his Koved Shiurim, it's in Simin Chaf Zayin, he points out that this is an eye-opening Tosfos. This seems to suggest a whole different approach that we would assume as far as the understanding of the concept that we were discussing throughout these dafim of late, of the kosher signs. If you'd ask, me or you, we would probably assume that the signs are just that. They're just signs. They're just features that we find by certain groups, certain species, and it's just the Torah's way of pointing to that species. That if it has the split hooves, it chews its cud, then that points to a certain group. If it has the various simanim of the kosher birds that points to a certain, it includes certain groups, certain species. That's the only significance of the signs. But Tosfos in Nida says Rabbi Chanan is suggesting a whole other understanding, which is that the signs themselves are what makes the animal kosher. Signs, the presence of the kosher sign makes this a kosher animal. That's like the DNA, if you will. That is the makeup that determines this animal to be kosher. And therefore, true, this swamp rooster is the exact same species as the swamp hen, same species, but since it doesn't have the kosher signs, it doesn't have the stuff that qualifies it as a kosher bird. So that is how Rabbi Chanan understands Tosfos Nida. He explains it. Tosfos over here in Chullin understands it in a more conventional way, that the signs are just signs. It's just a guideline, just a way to refer to, certain groups of birds, animals, that those are the kosher ones. Without those signs, they're not kosher. That is how Rabbi Chanan understands the point of contention between our Tosfos here in Chullin and Tosfos in Nida. Personally, I feel that it's hard to wrap my head around such an idea, in the sense that the Torah doesn't just talk about signs. The Torah, at length, it goes through many different species. Of course, in Parashat Shmini, both when it comes to the animals and the birds, it doesn't just say, okay, these are the signs and that's it, that's all you need to know. The Torah spends a lot of time talking about different types of animals. In fact, in the case of the birds, which is what our discussion is about, by the birds, the Torah doesn't mention the signs at all. The Rabbanan darshan from the Torah, but the Psukim themselves do not talk about signs, any kosher signs of birds. It only mentions different types, different species of birds. It goes through a whole list of 24 birds. These are the non-kosher ones. Everything else is kosher. So for me, it's very hard to fathom that no, the halacha of which animals or birds are kosher, which are not, is not about groups. It's not about identifying certain categories. It's about, does it have the sign or not? If that were true, once again, then the pasuk should just state that here are the signs, and that's all you need to know. So why I was wondering was, is there a possible way to read the Tosfos there in Nida such that he agrees with the conventional understanding that just, at least to me personally, seems more intuitive, that the signs are merely guidelines. So I was thinking that maybe there is a way to have such a reading. And that is that Tosfos there is actually dealing with this exact problem. Let's go over the steps of the Tosfos there. Tosfos starts out, he says that, we observe that this, the male one, the swamp rooster, doesn't have the kosher signs. And that's why the male version is not kosher. And then Tosfos asks a question. Now, this is where I'm, sort of diverging. I'm suggesting a different way to understand this question. The question, appears on the surface to be like a technical question, which is that, but hey, this bird was born from the female version, which the Gemara is saying is kosher, so what's born from a kosher thing should itself be kosher. So you could read Tosfos as, okay, he's asking like a technical question. But I'd like to suggest that this is much more than a technical question. This is perhaps a technical way of expressing, but he's asking a very fundamental question. He's asking that this doesn't seem to make any sense. The male swamp rooster, it's the same species. That's the premise over there. Tosfos is learning it's the same species. Okay, so then how is it possible to say that this bird has a different status? The male one has a different status than the female one. Doesn't make any sense. Tosfos themselves are struggling or grappling with this very problem. And what is Tosfos' answer? Tosfos' answer is that there's something special here, which is the fact that it grows in the egg, it doesn't grow from the mother. And so the point is this. You have that point, in addition to what Tosfos said in the beginning, the fact that as unusual and curious as that may sound, we have a situation, a very unique situation, where the male version of the species in question has pretty drastically different physical attributes. That the female one exhibits the kosher signs, Tosfos is saying, the male one does not. Okay, so that means we're dealing with, maybe scientifically, we would categorize it's the same species, but we're dealing with a situation where the male one is physically completely different. It's not directly, born from, grows in an egg, so it's not, a direct offshoot of the parent animal, the mother. So taking those two things together, Tosfos means to say that in this rare, unique situation, the Torah regards the male version of this type of bird as a species unto itself. Halachically, it's his own species. So according to this, Tosfos agrees with the simple, I would argue straightforward understanding of these psukim that the only significance of the kosher signs is one thing and one thing alone, which is it is just a way to identify the different groups. This is how you can go and find these different groups. You go by these signs. But it's about the groups themselves. The signs themselves do not have inherent significance. They themselves do not determine the animals to be kosher. Tosfos agrees with that. Tosfos just suggests this innovation, based on the simple reading of the Gemara. Certainly, the simple reading of this Gemara is that we're dealing with two birds of the same species, and the Gemara seems to say that there's a difference in halach between the male and female version of this species. So Tosfos is explaining this difficult Gemara by saying that it doesn't have the kosher signs, plus it grows by itself in the egg, so therefore, I guess in this instance we say that it's considered a different species. But Tosfos agrees with the basics in terms of how we use these kosher signs. And it's noteworthy that the Gemara concludes anyways that even the female one is not kosher. And it's also probably worthwhile to point out that Tosfos himself is very uncomfortable with this approach. Tosfos says, after saying this theory, he says, "Mihu, it appears to me that the ikar, the more reasonable approach, is the one that he said here in Chullin." So I think that's also worth noting for this whole discussion. Hope you found this interesting, and we will see you in the next video. Again, it should be a schus for the neshama of Shaftal Yikusiel ben Chaim Hillel. There's neshama upon his yahrzeit this week. And we'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.